Welcome to Rising Parent, your go-to podcast for navigating the stormy seas of teenage rebellion. I'm your host, Edna, and I'm here to help you weather the storm and emerge with a calmer, happier family. But first, please subscribe to our podcast. It helps us to provide valuable content that will support you on your parenting journey. In this episode, Tim and I will be diving deep into the world of rebellious behavior, exploring the underlying causes, and arming you with practical strategies to manage it. From understanding your child's perspective to setting clear boundaries, we've got you covered. So grab your favorite beverage and get ready to tame the rebel in your household.
Ever catch yourself in the middle of one of those classic toddler tantrums? Like you're watching this tiny human just completely lose it, and you're thinking, where on earth did that come from?
Oh, tell me about it.
Well, get ready to dive into the fascinating world of rebellious kids today, because trust me, you're going to want to grab a notebook for this one. We've got some seriously insightful sources lined up.
Oh, yeah.
Starting with renowned clinical psychologist Dr. Jordan Peterson and his really unique perspective on discipline. And then to round things out, we'll be tapping into this super interesting Healthline article that breaks down rebellious behavior at all ages.
Sounds fascinating.
It really is.
I mean, what's so compelling about Dr. Peterson's work is that he dives headfirst into those early years. You know, the terrible twos and beyond. He reminds us that even at that young age, kids are kind of hardwired to test boundaries. It's not just about being difficult. It's about them trying to understand social dynamics and figuring out where they fit in.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. So it's less about them like intentionally trying to drive us crazy and more about them being these little scientists running experiments.
Exactly. They're constantly testing those boundaries, observing our reactions, and essentially learning the rules of the game.
And sometimes those experiments involve some pretty epic meltdowns.
Right.
Dr. Peterson tells this really vivid story about his own son's temper tantrums on the stairs. I don't know about you, but just reading that made me feel a little less alone in those moments where my own kids have completely lost their cool.
It's so relatable.
Right.
And you know what's interesting is that Dr. Peterson's approach to those meltdowns isn't about punishment in the heat of the moment.
Oh, really?
He talks about giving his son the space to regain self-control, saying something like, you're going to sit on the steps until you have control of yourself.
It's like he's acknowledging that they're in the grip of this like huge wave of emotion and just need a minute to ride it out.
Exactly. And as soon as they're calm, he emphasizes the importance of wiping the slate clean, maintaining what he calls a pristine relationship.
So no holding grudges, which, let's be honest, can be tempting in the moment.
Oh, absolutely.
It's about focusing on building that strong, positive connection rather than getting stuck in a power struggle.
And that's where positive reinforcement comes in. As soon as the child demonstrates that desired behavior in this case, calming down, he suggests acknowledging it immediately and genuinely.
Okay, so we're not talking about like showering them with gifts or anything. It's more about that simple recognition, like a pat on the head or a kind word, just something that lets them know they successfully navigated that emotional storm.
Exactly.
You know, I'm curious though, while Dr. Peterson's approach is super insightful, it does feel very specific to those younger years. What about older kids and teenagers? That's where that Healthline article comes in, right? It's like the perfect bridge from those toddler years to figuring out how to deal with rebellion in like older kids and teenagers.
Yeah, totally.
I found it super helpful because it really digs into the why behind the behavior. Like, why are they doing this?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what I found really fascinating is that it points out that rebellion isn't always a bad thing.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, it can actually be a sign of healthy development, especially as kids get older.
So how do we tell the difference then between like a healthy dose of rebellion and something that maybe needs a little more attention?
Well, the article breaks down some key causes of rebellious behavior. And this is where you might want to grab that notebook again.
Oh, I've got mine.
It talks about things like unmet physiological needs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are they hungry? Are they sleep deprived? Which we all know can turn anyone into a bit of a grump.
Oh, yeah, totally. Sometimes a snack and a nap are all it takes. Like for kids and the adults.
Exactly.
Right.
Then there are situational factors.
Yeah.
So things like stress at school or maybe dealing with bullying,
Right.
which can definitely lead to acting out.
Makes sense.
And of course, we can't forget about those developmental stages.
Oh, yeah. The teenage years.
Think teenagers pushing for more independence, trying to figure out their identity.
And sometimes those teenage experiments in independence don't exactly align with what we had in mind.
You're telling me.
Yeah.
But the article makes this really important point about meeting those situations with empathy and understanding,
Okay.
rather than just jumping straight to punishment. It's about really trying to see things from their perspective.
Yeah.
Even if it's like super frustrating in the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Trying to reason with a toddler during a meltdown is a whole different ballgame than having a conversation with your teenager who's slamming their door.
Totally. And that's why understanding those developmental stages is so key. Like the article highlights, you've got to meet them where they're at communication-wise.
Makes sense. But even with the best communication skills in the world, there are going to be times when we need to, lay down the law a bit. What did the article have to say about setting boundaries?
Yeah, it emphasized that boundaries are still super important.
Yeah.
Even as kids get older and are craving more independence,
Yeah.
it's all about finding that balance, right?
Okay, so not a free-for-all, but not a dictatorship either.
Exactly.
Got it. Any tips on actually finding that sweet spot?
They stress how important it is to try to involve kids in setting those boundaries whenever possible. Obviously, a final say.
Right.
But just having those conversations and explaining the why behind the rules can make a huge difference.
It's like we were saying earlier, giving them that sense of ownership even within the boundaries. I love that. Now, circling back to Dr. Peterson for a sec, one thing that really stuck with me from his work was this idea of raising likable humans.
Yeah.
It's not just about obedience, right? It's about equipping our kids to actually thrive in the world, to be those people that others genuinely enjoy being around.
And I think that ties in beautifully with what we were just talking about, with the communication and the boundaries and the empathy. It's like those are the building blocks for raising kids who are not only respectful, but also kind, compassionate, and able to form healthy relationships.
It's about giving them those essential life skills, right?
Yeah.
Like emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And the Healthline article touches on that as well, emphasizing the importance of teaching kids how to express their needs and emotions in healthy, constructive ways.
So it's not just about preventing meltdowns. It's about giving them the tools to actually navigate those inevitable ups and downs of life.
And those tools, that emotional intelligence, that's what's going to serve them long after they've outgrown those temper tantrums and those teenage rebellions.
As we're wrapping up this deep dive, it strikes me that both of these sources, while coming from these different angles, really highlight that consistency is key.
Yeah.
But that flexibility is also essential. It's like that delicate dance we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Finding that balance between holding firm to those boundaries while also allowing space for kids to grow and explore and, yes, even mess up sometimes.
Because let's face it, making mistakes is part of the learning process.
Totally.
It's how we all figure out who we are and what we believe in.
So true. And as parents, our job isn't to shield our kids from every bump in the road, but to equip them with the skills and the resilience to navigate those bumps and come out stronger on the other side.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
It's about being that steady, supportive presence while they figure it all out.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway for our listeners today. You're not alone in this wild, messy, beautiful journey of raising humans.
We're all in this together.
We're all in this together, figuring it out. One tantrum, one boundary push and experiment, one heartfelt conversation at a time. And who knows, maybe we even learn a thing or two about ourselves along the way. Until next time, happy diving.